But in terms of either the undertone preamps, the EQ, the unfair child, you want to just riff on that? What of that stuff do you use? You have like an older version of the unfair child, or what are
Yeah,
you using?
I use it all. You can kind of see my little rack over here. So I have a original Unfair Child. So this is kind of the first batch. I want to say of like 10. It looks like the version 2, but it was designed with a different tube set. And originally, when Undertone Audio started building the Unfair Child, the 6B or the 6386 tube, which is the original Very tube that was used in the original Fairchild, was not being manufactured, and you couldn't find them anywhere. They're really hard to find, really expensive. And so Garen, our friend Garen, you remember,
Shout out, Garen.
he designed the original circuit to be 6BC8, which is a different type of Very tube. It's the one that's found in like the UA175B, a couple other Very compressors. And it's sonically, it's just a little more aggressive. And it tends to distort a little bit easier. And in the original Unfairchild, there was a magic in that, right? Where it was like, it was just intense. It was just a heavy-handed compressor. And then you could use it feed forward or feed backward. There were a couple different modes where you can kind of get different sonic goodness out of it. And then inevitably, those tubes became really hard to find. And then nobody was making those tubes. And I think there was a point where Eric and Undertone bought like the last of the new old stock that they could find. You know, there were just thousands of tubes in the building that they were going through and testing. And most of them were garbage. They had to throw them away.
Really?
And then inevitably, I think J&J started making the original 6386 tube again to probably service all of the new Very compressors that were coming out. And so then they modified that design to kind of be back closer to the original Fairchild. And that's what the modern thing is using today. And those tubes, I mean, you know, there's 8 of them, and each one is like $100. You know, so like it's just the tubes in that box alone are expensive. But that being said, mine is great. It's very different. I don't really use it as compressor. It basically lives on my mix bus and just adds subtle distortion, harmonic saturation. It's got a pretty gnarly EQ curve that I mix into from the get-go, which is kind of fun. It's got this huge mid-range lift, and I find that it adds a cool mid-range presence that I wouldn't normally add in on individual stuff.
Where does that sit?
I mean, it's literally almost at like, it's like a 1 dB lift around like 1.5, and the Q is just like essentially full spectrum. Like the width goes down to like 100 up to like 10K. And then that goes into a set of undertone EQs, in which I have a pretty drastic high shelf going. I mean, we're talking like 4 or 5 dB up at like 11 or 12K. And it's that weird shape where there's the high shelf, but there's a little bit of a dip in the high mid range, like from 3 to 5K. So it's dipping
right,
there.
So it's not just shelving up; it's doing this like down and then
exactly.
Up. Or maybe
And
it's
kind of this, it's kind of this thing that I stumbled across where I did a couple of mixes with it, and before I shot it and like actually saw what the curve was, and it was just like, man, this is really cool, and it just got me closer on mixes a lot faster. And then when I shot it, I was like, wow, this is wild. Am I really mixing into this for all of this stuff? But it sounded good. So I've never been like a huge analog mix bus chain guy until this year, until I've settled into this room. And like, obviously I'm doing all my mixing here now. So it's a little easier to have like a static mix bus. But it's been great. And it's definitely like taken my mixes up another notch.
And how much, I know, I'm sure there's a measurement for it, but maybe just subjectively, how much harmonic distortion do you think is being added by the Unfair Child?
Very, very little. And it's funny because there was somebody on the Discord, and apologies for not remembering, but when I shared the curve with everyone, and someone actually went in and made a Pro Q3 curve that mimicked my mix bus. So I actually ended up using that and downloading it. And now it's like when I run stems, I'll do that so I can bounce offline because it sounds like A/B. It's pretty fucking close. And then the one thing that I couldn't do in ProQ was the saturation. So I basically used the Saturn plugin from FabFilter and tried to recreate through having a graph and seeing what the overtone scale was. Just went through the presets and just got something that matched as close as possible. And it was like a very, very small amount. But granted, it's on your mix bus. So it's not like, you're not adding a lot of distortion, but it was enough to be like, okay, you start to see the resonances in the harmonic scale. And so now I have this like Saturn Pro Q3 setup where if I had to in a pinch, I could definitely go on a laptop and print mixes and it would sound pretty much the same, which is kind of
nice. Interesting. Well, also, yet again, shout out to the Discord for the people that are not on it. You can be stealing the Grammy-winning secrets of mix engineer Cian Riordan.
Put it all up there.
We'll put it up there. Put it up there again. That's really interesting. And you're not doing a lot of recording in that room, so I imagine you're not using the preamps, but I assume you've used them in the time. That's what I use for my main vocal chain. Well, not now because I'm on the road, but that was mine was like I think it was just the undertone pre with both the transformers on, with a little bit of high-end boost. Again, just a little bit of that shelf. And then through my, I think, revision F1176, just adding a little bit of harmonic color in there. But have you recorded a lot through those as well?
I mean, those preamps, they're I think of the modern era of preamps, they're kind of the new gold standard. And I think they're so flexible, people who haven't used the undertone pre's, whether it's on the MPEQ or the MPDI4 or whatever the 4 channel is called, there's a lot of options with transformers. And so you can go from very, very colored, even distorted, to extremely clean, class A, transformerless, and everything in between. So I just think like my two favorite preamps are wildly different. There's the undertone, which does a lot. It can be a little bit complicated, or the Ampex 351. Like, I think between those two, I can pretty much get any sound that I want. The Ampex is amazing because the distortion that comes from that, anyone that's used the decapitator in the A setting, that is that distortion that they're trying to mimic. And so it's an old tube mic pre that used to be attached to a 351 tape machine, and there's just like an endless amount of gain. So it can be super clean, really thick kind of tube sounding, to full on distorted, and the distortion that you get from it is just incredibly musical. And it's just the best. So those are my like desert island mic pre's.
Thanks for watching. Just a reminder, all of this content is free. There's no secret knowledge here. There's no Patreon. We don't read ads. We don't have sponsors. We're just trying to build a knowledge base. All that we ask in return is that you share it with somebody. Thanks so much.